In continuing our analysis of Ron, let's shift our focus to where she may draw some of her inspiration. We'll begin at the end of Texhnolyze, where, in one of their final exchanges, Ron tells Kana that she refuses to be his oracle any longer. As we've discussed in previous episodes, Texhnolyze has many parallels to Greek literature and appears to share many characteristics with these classical motifs. The use of prophecy as a vehicle to establish conflict, especially in tragedy, was a stable plot device in many traditional ancient Grecian works. Fate and prophecy were integral to Grecian society. As J.C. Kammerbeek states in the book Mnemosyne, a journal of classical studies, it would be an understatement to claim that prophecy and its concomitants were important in Greek life of the classical period. In point of fact, the latter was inextricably bound up in them. Their occurrence in drama was taken as a matter of course by the audience. Texhnolyze applies this concept to its structural framework, with the war between self-determination and fate as an overarching theme as well as an ominous but impersonal threat. Likewise, the characters are in full acceptance of the power of the seer, and as a result, the audience takes as a matter of course that prophecy is within the established rules of the world as presented. In Greek and other ancient traditions, the individuals responsible for relaying prophecies to the people were known as oracles. A type of spiritual medium, oracles were thought to be granted visions of the future by gods. Their word held immense power and was influential in shaping the historical and political landscape of Greece. Ron's central function is similar to these oracles. She sees, through a form of revelation, a potential future, and can communicate it to others, whether through ritualistic ceremonies or in a less direct and official capacity as the voice of the city. Her role is both spiritual and political, as her word serves as the basis for Gabe's governance. As a side note, while she is referred to as the seer, her powers should not be confused with the usual definition. Her abilities are depicted as relating to precognition, with the future being revealed directly to her. Seer in this instance is a colloquialism, and not associated with the act of interpreting signs in natural things. Featured prominently in many Greek myths, the oracle at Delphi was in service of the god Apollo. Though in later years older women were chosen, in the early days the oracle, known as the Pythia, was said to be a young, virginal woman, which bears some overlap with Ron's depiction. Within their respective temples, some oracles were accompanied by officiants and attendants who were tasked with assisting the oracle in her duties. We see similar imagery depicted, as Ron is also flanked by cult-like adherents who assist in her rituals and serve as protectors. A central tenet of the Greek understanding of prophecy was that fate could not be changed. Attempting to do so was an affront to the gods and natural order. Many Greek tragedies center on a protagonist whose attempts to cheat fate result in a painful or unpleasant end. It is here that Ron's similarities make a slight break with the oracle, as her visions are not necessarily absolute. As previously discussed, her revelation of the sage being fatally shot by the Salvation Union does not come to pass. The creative team is quick to establish that Ron is not infallible, and leaves open the potential to escape or avoid the fate she sees. This generates a different and in some aspects deeper metaphysical conflict, as well as a greater sense of drama, as our heroes could potentially escape the calamity foreseen. Another similarity is the presence or incorporation of a holy plant. The oracle at Delphi, whose temple was dedicated to Apollo, utilized the leaves and branches of a laurel tree as a part of their ritual. There are varying accounts regarding Apollo's relation to the plant. In the most common myth, he made it his sacred tree after a nymph named Daphne, whom he had become ensorcelled with desire for, was transformed into a laurel tree in order to flee from him. In other accounts, because of his close association, it was believed that the god's presence inhabited the laurel, and granted visions of the future to oracles, through the rustling of leaves or through creating and inhaling the vapors of burned branches. Texhnolyze is less direct in this regard, but there are two special and in some sense sacred plants which appear throughout the series. The first is Raffia, which is integral in the process of Texhnolization, but as previously discussed, also bears a sort of sacred attribute, as it is grown among Lux's deceased. The citizens effectively consume and imbue themselves with this plant through what could be viewed as a sort of four-phase ritual. More obvious are Ron's flowers. I was surprised to learn that these are intended to be orchids, despite their rather nondescript rendering. In fact, Ron's name utilizes the same kanji for the orchid, so the parallel appears intentional. The orchids in her home are white, which is the color of sorrow in Buddhism and a color traditionally worn by mourners in Buddhist funerals. This ties back into our video on Ron's powers. It's fair to extrapolate that the Raffia harvested in the caverns of the dead may be imbued with or have a connection to the spirits of the deceased, resulting in his strange properties. This presence of a spiritual world is not focused on in a straightforward manner, but based on the events at the end of the series, Ron is likely in some capacity a form of spiritual medium. The flowers, while not necessarily used in her rituals of divination, serve as a reminder of this connection to the dead. It's also worth considering that these flowers and their connection to mourning are symbolic foreshadowing of humanity's end and the fate of our characters. There are some loose structural parallels that Onishi and the Organo who go to meet with Ron for guidance undergo that evoke Greeks who would consult with the oracle at Delphi. The first was a journey to Delphi, motivated by a need for information to provide answers to important questions. Onishi, troubled by the gradually increasing violence and the conspiracy behind it, initially goes to consult with the sage, but the sage defers to the seer as she is the source of information and authority for Gabe. Onishi accepts that she may hold some key to saving Lux from whatever evil is brewing beneath the surface and implores her assistance. Those seeking to consult the oracle would first meet with the priests and be interviewed. The nature of the visit was sordid, and the supplicant typically had rituals to go through involving how questions were framed. Onishi's process overlaps in some capacity. He has an interview with the sage, lays out his concerns for the future of Lux, and is provided an audience with the seer. While the holy plant is not visibly utilized during the ceremony, it is present through the intercut scenes of Ichise examining a storeroom where orchids are being grown. The supplicant would then put forth his question, receive an answer, and depart. In this case, both Onishi and Ichise receive answers regarding what their futures hold, and in the fashion of an oracle, these revelations are cryptic in nature. The supplicant returns home with the oracle's words, though in the case of Ran's prophecy, her words are less than helpful, and have little for Ichise or Onishi to do but wait. Most notable, Ran breaks with the traditional depiction of an oracle by playing a semi-active role in the unfolding drama, seeking to undermine her visions in some capacity by involving herself directly. Likewise, due to her fallibility and the varying time frame of her visions, it's difficult to determine what her motivations are when intervening, or whether she's improving situations or making them worse, be it intentionally or accidentally. By her own account, nothing changes in her favor as a result of her actions, which fuels her depression in the latter half of the series, but it is interesting for us as viewers to dissect her participation in the decline of the city. My goal in presenting this parallel is less to infer that the creative team intended to duplicate Grecian storytelling, but to point out the similarity in Texhnolyze's structure to the classical motifs of tragedy. Ran's role as the oracle and motivator of much of the devastation that befalls Lux, and the main cast's impossible gambit to escape prophecy, is something which has been an enduring part of mythological and narrative structures, and so it is interesting to see its transportation and manifestation in modern works. In keeping with the presence of Shinto Buddhist motifs throughout Texhnolyze, Ran's depiction unsurprisingly draws some inspiration from East Asia. No doubt those familiar with Japanese mythology, cultural ceremonies, or even some basic anime tropes and themes will be quick to recognize the fox or kitsune mask that Ran carries and wears throughout the series. The kitsune is a yokai, a type of spiritual entity, and more specifically in this case a fox spirit, which possesses supernatural powers, long life, and superior intelligence among its other defining traits. Beyond her mask, Ran shares a great many characteristics with these beings which I believe are intentional, though subtly depicted. While I don't believe she's intended to literally be a kitsune, the symbolic parallels will provide a basis for some later syllogism in regards to her character, her abilities, and the symbolic meaning of visuals. Likewise, her powers draw a parallel but are not displayed in the same overtly magical way. Ran's visual coding can answer questions about her nature beyond what is directly spelled out for the audience. Kitsune are beings of immense and varied power, with a litany of folk stories establishing their supernatural capacity. Before we begin, it is important that we establish the duality of the kitsune's nature. In any encounter with this spirit, there is an equal chance that the kitsune would be benevolent, as it might be malicious. Because of the larger dualistic themes which run throughout Texhnolyze, these competing depictions can influence our interpretation once applied to the narrative. Benevolent foxes were referred to as Zenko, in some cases Myobu, and were associated with the goddess Inari. These yokai often served as her messengers, guides for travelers, or wards against evil. Their counterpart, the Yako, sometimes referred to as the Nogitsune, were malevolent. While some accounts simply depict them as mischievous or tricksters, other tales portray them as bringers of calamity for any human unfortunate enough to cross paths with them. Zenko are typically depicted with lighter colors, most often white, while the Yako are depicted with darker colors, in many cases dark gray or black. We see this delineation depicted visually, with Ran in a white mask representative of the Zenko, and her adherents wearing black masks representative of the Yako. We can interpret this visual in several ways. First, the visual of the kitsune associates Ran with the goddess Inari, who was a symbol of fertility, harvest, and prosperity. This of course is a stark juxtaposition, a symbol of vitality amongst the dead and decaying city of Lux. This could be viewed as the creator's attempt to tell us that salvation could be found in the seer, and much of the action within seems to suggest that the hopes of the people of Lux and Gabe hinge on the seer's proactive role in guiding them. However, we could also view it as an indication of failed potential and an inversion of expectation. While Ran is visually coded as a savior, she ultimately, even if unintentionally, leads her people into ruin. Ran's visual contrast to her religious devotees may be done to elevate her above the rest of the citizens of Gabe. It may also be done to associate her alone with divine powers. We can also view it as a subtle articulation of the nature of Gabe's citizens. While Ran is passive and innocent, the citizens of Gabe are aggressors, tasked with the duty of carrying out violence in order to protect the seer at any cost. The Zenko are associated with good omens, and so one might see this as a suggestion that Ran is a singular beacon of hope among the unending bleakness. To that degree, we might abstract this visual into a sort of symbolic yin-yang, a single good amongst a sea of evil, a symbol which appears subtly but infrequently throughout the series. Illusion was a paramount trait of the Kitsune. This power took many forms, and the illusions that Kitsune could conjure varied in type and scale. One such illusory power was transformation, an important and recurring ability displayed by the Kitsune throughout human encounters with this particular yokai. Though usually fox-like in appearance, the Kitsune were said to be able to take on human forms, most commonly among them old men, beautiful women, or young girls. While Ran never shapeshifts outright, she often displays her powers after donning her mask. We can see this as representative of a transformation into the seer, followed by a transformation back into a human once she removes it. The use of a mask also provides a barrier of separation between Ran's competing identities. As the seer, she is impersonal, a messenger and harbinger, more akin to a force than an individual. Once removed, Ran is human, a fragile and lost child. The separation allows us to see, on the one hand, a relinquishing of identity for Ran when assuming her role as the seer. On the other, it also gives us insight into Ran's interfacing with her abilities. She appears to want to keep these aspects separate, and in some cases wants nothing to do with her powers, their unpleasantness, or their responsibility at all. An interesting, if not disturbing account that I've read is that Kitsune were capable of not only altering their own form, but reality outright, conjuring entire cities that would feel real to those under its spell. This in particular stuck out because of Kano's insistence that Luke's is illusory in nature, and that it exists in his mind. Throughout, Kano refers to Ran as his sister, and while I still believe he is being poetic, they do share a set of golden irises, which might mean that they have similar origin. If that is the case, then perhaps there's something to the idea of Luke's being a shared illusion. Not that I necessarily endorse this interpretation, but just some food for thought. The oldest and wisest Kitsune, once they had reached a certain age, were granted a form of omniscience about global events. This, of course, is much like Ran's connection to the obelisk in the city of Luke's. The sage notes that Ran would be more effective and powerful once she is older, which seems to be in keeping with this motif, though I have my doubts that this was intentional symbolism rather than a narrative tool to place Ran and the heroes at a disadvantage. That said, Ran does lack the wisdom necessary to make decisions which would positively affect the city of Luke's, which was a prerequisite to the Kitsune's vision. Still, the ability to utilize precognitive or omniscient powers provides some distinct parallel. Likewise, we can compare her connection to the city of Luke's operating as the all-seeing voice of the city as a form of limited omniscience. Her connection to its citizens allows what appears to be a form of mental omnipresence, as well as to convey information to others through their technolization. Because Kitsune were capable of distorting reality as a part of their illusions, they have been described as possessing a sort of time manipulation. Ran herself does not manipulate time, but her ability to see into the future and potentially affect the present so as to avoid the undesirable gives her some slight overlap with this power as well. In some cases, Kitsune are depicted with companions, and use their powers to the benefit of those who show them respect. Ran functions in this capacity for both Onishi and Ichise directly. Ran's first major dealing with Ichise is to guide him out of the sewers to safety and comfort him. Kitsune are also said in some instances to gain a particular fondness for an individual and become attached to them. This is not the same as possession, which we will discuss later, but can be seen as a sort of supernatural tethering. For Onishi, Ran, intertwined with the voice of the city, provides information and guidance, ensuring his continued success as a leader of the Organo. Onishi is steadfastly committed to keeping order and peace, and thus a valuable asset to Ran, who wishes to avoid Luke's demise and the bloodshed it would bring. Of note is that samurai were common among the types of travelers Kitsune would appear to. Among the cast, Onishi's stoic nature and his anachronistic wielding of a katana as a means of keeping order both literally and figuratively give him an appearance that one could view as a modern equivalence for this feudal Japanese warrior. Kitsunetsuki, or possession by fox, was another ability attributed to the Kitsune. According to folk stories, there were 3 types of possession, 2 of which are relevant to our examination. In the first, the Kitsune would possess an individual for use as a medium to perform divinations. Similar to the oracle, the possessed individual would be capable of predicting the future or providing secret knowledge. It was often believed that, like the gods speaking through the oracle, the Kitsune would speak through the medium, utilizing their mouth. Depending on our interpretation, Ran displays a similar capacity, speaking with an ethereal authority about future events as if possessed. This overlap reinforces the concept of Ran's place as oracle and spiritual medium. The second form of possession is the control of individuals. In this form, the fox spirit causes the host to behave erratically and emotionally, making them prone to violent outbreaks and hysteria. We'll examine in greater detail as we dissect Ron's role in Luke's downfall, but I believe there's evidence that she is capable, at least on a subliminal level, of influencing individuals' actions and thoughts. In particular, she seems to have a wordless link to Achise, and after some repeated viewings, I think there's strong evidence to suggest she psychically prods him into the confrontation in Rogue 8 as a means of thwarting Yoshi's plans. On the topic of hysteria, Ron is at least partially responsible for the despair that drives the outbreak of violence and destruction in Luke's. One might view them as being indirectly under the influence of Ron's powers. As stated earlier, I don't think that Ron is necessarily intended to be an outright embodiment of a kitsune or divine being. Rather, I think that these symbolic elements are meant to provide us with information beyond the context of the narrative. Understanding the frame of reference and the visual language of an artistic medium is important in revealing what is being communicated to us, and may assist in bettering our understanding or clarifying a message that the artist is attempting to convey. And of course, your own interpretation is also valuable. Given what I provided here, I'm curious about your thoughts and how this might influence your interpretation, and if it in any way enhances your viewing experience. Feel free to let me know in the comments along with any related insights or things you think I might have missed. As always, your contributions help to enhance the discussion, and I genuinely enjoy reading what you have to say. That's all for this segment, so until next time, thank you for watching, and this has been your Crit Bonus.